can do. So from EPIP headquarters, wanted to give you a little heads up on what's next. We have our next Wednesday webinar 2 weeks from today on April 13th at 3 p.m. The topic is going to be focused on worker cooperatives, so looking at poverty alleviation and system change through worker cooperatives. Definitely hope that you guys can join us there. If you'd like to register, you can find us on epip.org/events, and you can register there. Oh, sorry. Also, want to make sure that you know about our conference, which is coming up in September. The 13th to the 15th of this year will be in Baltimore, and would love for folks to put it on your calendars and let us know if you have any ideas about how to get involved, and we'd love to hear from you. Quick housekeeping before we move into the presentation. As I said, if you have any technical difficulties, please just drop a line into the questions box, and I'll do my best to try and help you troubleshoot. If you have any comments or questions, there'll be some Q&A throughout the presentation, and again at the end. Just drop your questions into the question box. We're going to actually read them out anonymously, so you can feel free to write any questions in there, and we'd love to hear from you as we go through the presentation. Polls and questions, as I said, are going to be anonymous, so we'll have polls running through the presentation as well. And if you'd like to participate, we'd love to hear from you, but we won't know who you are when you send in your answers. If you're following on social media, we would love to be able to connect with you through the hashtag EPIP webinar. The recording today, the presentation today is being recorded, so that way we can keep it in our archives. And you're going to receive a survey at the end from the system with a few brief questions. We'd love to hear your feedback and ideas. That way we can keep providing content that is interesting and relevant for all of you. So without further ado, I'm super excited to introduce 3 wonderful women who've been doing amazing work in the world and also some great work to bring together this presentation today. So thank you very much, and welcome to Ariane Schaefer, Sadaf Cameron, and Alyssa Hauser. And I'm going to now turn it over to you, Ariane.
Great. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great. So I am just getting this set up. And busy.
Looks great.
Everyone can see. Okay, it looks great. Thank you all for that moment of tech. Great. Thank you so much, Biz. We're so happy to be collaborating with EPIP. I attended a lot of EPIP webinars last year myself, so I'm hoping that we can become part of this amazing archive and this value that you all are bringing to the field. And I'm especially excited today to have my friends Alyssa Hauser and Sadaf Cameron be sharing stories with us. So what's going to happen today on the webinar, just to give a quick rundown, is I'm going to talk a little bit about what Indie Philanthropy is, why it's important, where it is in the field, and then we're going to hear from Alyssa and Sadaf about how they have used 2 different methods of Indie Philanthropy in their work. And then we're going to have some time for some questions. Okay, so what is Indie Philanthropy, and what do we mean when we say that? Before I get into that, I wanted to mention that Indie Philanthropy was developed out of Kindle Project. It's something that we started at Kindle Project a couple of years ago, and just this past January of 2016, we've spun off to become our own independent entity. But it was really born out of Kindle Project and also born out of the great minds of Alyssa and Sadaf and several others who came together to really identify the fact that the field of philanthropy needed a new name for all of this creative grant making that we saw that was happening, and we needed a place and a meeting point and a way to be able to interact and learn together. So that's some of the background, which I'd be happy to share more of later, of how Indie Philanthropy came into the world, and then how it's framed, I think, is also really important. So Indie Philanthropy refers to funding approaches that are a creative and positive disruption to the status quo of funding. It also gives a common name for a wide range of alternatives that are reshaping the field of philanthropy, and we're going to hear about some of those today. Something that I feel is important to mention as well is that Indie Philanthropy is not in opposition to mainstream philanthropy, but rather it's adding much needed diversity and creativity to the field. And it's also a term used to describe funders and donors that are moving capital creatively for long-term solutions to address our social, cultural, ecological, and economic challenges. So that's what we mean when we say indie philanthropy. And what defines an indie philanthropist? It really is looking not only at what gets funded, but who makes those decisions and how the funding is done. So with the initiative, we care a lot about philanthropic culture, and we want the way we give to be able to mirror our internal values and the healthier world that we're all seeking, I think. So this is one thing that I really love to talk about, especially at the beginning of a webinar or when people are having a sort of first contact with indie philanthropy, is talking about the kind of qualities that make up an indie philanthropist. And these are some of the qualities that we've identified and noticed that many of the indie philanthropists we know have, including Sadaf and Melissa. I think they have all of these. But not every indie philanthropist will have each of these qualities, but really this list is here to act as a guidepost and a set of reminders as we work to fund in the most creative and responsive ways possible for each of our projects. So many indie philanthropists are funding innovation that is often overlooked by mainstream funders, and we seek out and appreciate experimental work. We're going to hear about a lot of that today. We're also risk-taking in our funding and support risk takers, seeing them as the ones who often are truly shifting our culture and our systems. Indie philanthropists really welcome failure as a part of learning and as a part of the process. Many of us also believe in the importance of deeper collaboration and to work consciously to reduce funder-grantee power imbalances. And as indie philanthropists, we're also committed to doing the inner work of clarifying our deepest values, our real motivations, highest intentions, so that our outer work can be honest and aligned and successful. We also prioritize directing dollars to those that are working on addressing the causes of injustice and not just the symptoms. I think that's a really important point. And lastly, indie philanthropists really look at all of our resources, our investments, our influence, our relationships, and our grants, and do what we can to leverage all of these resources for change. So why is indie philanthropy important? I mean, I think that members of the EPIP community, members of the indie philanthropy community, there is something that's very evident of why we need indie philanthropy in the world and in the field of philanthropy. But I think it's important to spell it out regardless so that we can all kind of be on the same page here. And, this really is about looking at the local and global challenges, our need for bold solutions. And in a minute, I'm going to talk about sort of how traditional philanthropy has fallen short in mobilizing, grassroots work and looking at some of the most creative talent in the world. And I think that philanthropy hasn't recognized that and hasn't that. And indie philanthropy also is needed, I think, to break open this funding space. It brings more diverse voices into the field, and that's very important as well. And that's one of the needs that we saw that we could really help to serve by creating the initiative. And indie philanthropy, because it equalizes power, it creates more opportunities to transform our relationships and our communities. So it really is about this transformational piece. And in our experience engaging in this kind of philanthropy, it makes sort of what has seemed impossible start to become possible. Okay, so here is a piece I wanted to just chat about impact for a second and sort of traditional philanthropy, not versus, I think that's the wrong phrase, but looking at where traditional philanthropy kind of exists in the field and where indie philanthropy can step in. So I think that funders really love to talk about impact, which makes sense because, we have to be in conversation with each other, and in the field, measuring impact and having metrics for goals can be very, very important. However, only certain types of impact are easy to measure with the kind of rigorous structures that are so popular amongst funders and within the structures that traditional philanthropy has set up. And to measure impact in this kind of traditional way requires a high degree of certainty and a low degree of risk. That goes back to the quality I had just mentioned before. And this can really be antithetical to this kind of outside the box grant making. And to support truly transformational and systemic change, the values need to be a little bit different. And therefore the practices need to match that as well. So the work of lasting social change and indie philanthropy often involves this high degree of uncertainty and a certain tolerance for risk. It also includes the willingness to let goals and outcomes change over time through the dynamic process of the work unfolding in the real and unpredictable world that we live in. So really it's about giving more space, and it's more relationship based, I think. And more indie funders are looking beyond sort of the narrow relationships that can exist within traditional philanthropy towards a more holistic view. And this helps to understand that radical change is a very complex process involving an interplay, between multiple organizations and strategies within a broader ecosystem. So indie philanthropists really understand that there's no single organization or individual grantee or even one single set of metrics that can dismantle an oppressive social structure. So I know that was maybe a lot to take in. Soon we're going to hear about the way that this happens in actions from Sadaf and Elisa. But first, I just wanted to give you a quick snapshot. If you haven't visited the Indie Philanthropy site, which is indiephilanthropy.org, here is one page that you'll land on, which gets you into the big amount of resources that we have available to you. So our resource section, if you have any resources from your work that you want to share with us, we'd be happy to post them on the site. The methods I'll talk about in just a moment. And Indie Interactive, I would really encourage you after the webinar or sometime this week to take about 10 or 15 minutes and go through this online interactive tool, and which really helps to identify the kind of funding method that might best suit what you're most interested in and what you're most passionate about. And it will send you a personalized action plan there as well. So it's something fun to play with. And today we're going to be hearing deeply about 2 of our funding methods from Sadaf and Elisa, but here are the 9 that we've identified and that we explain in detail on the site. So for each of these methods, there are a lot of stories that go with them, but also it explains how these methods work, what structures you might need, what the benefits are, and also what some of the challenges are. So there's a lot of resources available for that are available for you online at our site. And also I would just like to say that this is not a static piece of work. We're hoping to grow and add new methods and new creative funding practices that we haven't even heard of yet. So please do be in conversation with us. Indie Philanthropy really is a movement that's growing. And now I'm very excited to welcome Elisa and hear your voice and hear your stories. Elisa is the Executive Director of the Pollination Project, and I think you've all read her very impressive bio on the webinar invitation. Again, I just want to mention that Elisa has been a key part in developing Indie Philanthropy since we began with just an idea and a couple of notes in a Google Doc some years ago. Her wisdom and her incredible way of practicing Indie Philanthropy so innately for so long has been such a gift to the field, and we're so excited to welcome you to hear your stories. And I think she just might be having a bit of trouble unmuting, so bear with us.
You want to run a quick poll to see who's on the call while Elisa works on her unmuting?
Yes, I do. Thank you. Thanks, Biz.
Okay. Yeah, no worries. So everybody, I'm going to just run a quick poll here. We just want to get a sense of who you're representing on the call today. If you can choose which of these selections best describes your employer, that'll give us a sense of who's here. So if you can go ahead and vote now. Great, I'm going to leave it open for 5 more seconds if anyone hasn't voted yet. Great. So it looks like the majority of folks joining today are from foundations, 55%, then about 21% from philanthropic advisory firms, and 12% from both nonprofits and other sources. So welcome everybody. Thanks for taking the poll. And Elisa, are you set to go?
I think so. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Awesome.
Ariane, if you can just go into slide share mode again. Great.
Great. Well, it's wonderful to be here. Thanks for inviting me to share about flow funding. I'm the executive director of the Pollination Project, and we make micro grants every single day of the year. And one of the strategies we use quite a bit is flow funding. Flow funding is when a funder entrusts money to an individual or to an organization to distribute. I think advance the slide from where it's at. I think the definition is on the next. Oh, okay, great. So it's a way to democratize giving, and I like to also refer to it as pushing power out to the edges of a network. For the Pollination Project, since we started, we've made about 135 Flow Fund grants, totaling about $111,000. This year alone, we're going to be making about 120 more grants through Flow Funding. So it's a strategy we really love. And I personally love it because it allows people who are not normally in the position of being able to give money away to give money away. Flow Funding was started by a woman named Marian Rockefeller Weber. She's a member of the Rockefeller family. It kind of came to her as a vision in 1991. After many years of finding her philanthropy to be lonely and isolating and overwhelming, she had this vision of a new way of giving. She had just finished doing her will, and she was leaving a bunch of money to visionaries and activists to give away, and realized she could actually just do that in her lifetime. So she started by asking 8 visionary activists who she knew and trusted to each take $60,000 over the course of 3 years and give the money away spontaneously as they traveled. So they were well-positioned activists and visionaries who Marian really trusted, and they flowed that money through them. Over 17 years, there's been about 89 other Flow Fund Circle members who she's funded. They've met in cohorts on an annual basis to share learning and outcomes. And many other organizations have picked up this model and done it their own way. Kindle Project has used flow funding. Movement Generation has used flow funding. There's a lot of groups out there. Some of you may have used it in your own work, but it's a really flexible strategy that really shifts the power dynamic in funding. So this, actually, if you can go back one slide. So this photo is a flow fund that we did recently. It actually was a flow fund we gave to one of our staff members, which isn't something we normally do, but we have a staff member named Julie who's done a lot of international aid work. And back in October, she was asked to go to Lesbos, Greece, to help with the influx of refugees coming onto the beaches. She was asked to bring medicine because they needed someone to carry suitcases full of medical equipment and supplies. So we gave her a small flow fund to use on the ground when she could kind of get a lay of the land and see what needed to happen. She very quickly saw that there was very little to no infrastructure from where people were landing on the beach to get to any kind of refugee intake location. So and many of them were coming in injured or needing medical attention with no way to get to the medical attention other than to walk many miles. So she rented a car with some of the money, and she started basically patrolling the beaches and the island, finding people who needed transport or people who were in dire circumstances. And then she got all these other volunteers to help. So they had like a 24/7 patrol going with this emergency shuttle, bringing people, she described like a guy who literally couldn't use his legs, and he was in a wheelchair, but he couldn't travel to Greece in the wheelchair. So his friends rolled him up in a carpet and carried him from place to place for several weeks until he got to this beach, coming off the boat, having traveled in a carpet, literally. This photo, I think, is so joyful. She found this very large family, very far from any intake location, probably, she said, about 6 miles across rugged terrain. They had been traveling for a long time, and they would have had to walk over a day to get to anywhere. And she found them, and she said this photo is barely showing the number of people who were in that car. I think she said somewhere between 12 and 18 people in this little car, and that there's like rows upon rows of people. But they're smiling because it was like the first nice thing that happened for this family in weeks and weeks and weeks. Is here they are in a place they don't know. They have no idea where they landed, where they're going, and here's this person welcoming them and bringing them to where they need to go. So when Julie left, she actually flow funded another group of volunteers to take over this emergency shuttle service for another 3 weeks. And then an NGO stepped in and took it over after that. So she basically was able to, with about $1,000, fill a very, very needed gap for many weeks that was a volunteer-driven, very specialized need on this island that served hundreds upon hundreds of people, and then an NGO was able to step in and handle it. So there are some key kind of components to why this money, this $1,000, really got used extremely well, and why it was able to be used that well. First of all, it was given in a really timely manner to someone who we trusted. The person was positioned to use it for its highest impact, and it empowered her to do what needed to be done. So next slide. So some of the benefits of flow funding: it creates meaning with small amounts of money. So even a very small amount can stretch so much further because of how the person who is giving the money is positioned. It's proactive instead of reactive. So rather than accepting grant applications and reacting to them, it's a proactive way of looking for what is needed and giving to that. It builds trust, relationship, and community. Often flow funding, it builds trust throughout a network. So you need to trust the flow funder, and then they in turn trust the person or group that they're giving the money to. So it's a kind of a flow of trust throughout a network. It can reduce paperwork and administration. You aren't dealing with applications. Often you aren't even dealing with contracts. It depends on the situation. At the Pollination Project, we do have some paperwork with our flow funds. Marion gave the money to these flow fund circle members, and that was it. They handled everything from there. She just gave the money to them, and that was it for the paperwork on her end. And then of course it democratizes giving. It allows philanthropy to go through many hands, not just through the hands of those who have the money. Next slide. There's of course some pitfalls of flow funding. First of all, flow funders don't always make the grants that you would have made. We've seen that in a couple situations where you kind of need to just trust your flow funder, and even if they do something that you wouldn't necessarily do, that's okay, but you need to be okay with that. Accountability is 2 steps removed. So whoever receives the final flow fund amount doesn't necessarily feel accountable to you or your foundation. It requires you to know the right people to become flow funders. So you need to have well-positioned groups or individuals who can make the most of the money. And of course, letting go of control is hard. I know that many foundations and donors, it's really hard to let go of control at that level. Next slide. So some ways to get started. Often when I share about flow funding, philanthropy professionals will kind of say to me, this all sounds great, but there is no way my foundation is going to go for this. It's way too scary and unknown. So what are the baby steps? What are the interim ways to get that moving? Let me tell you a quick story about how we got started with flow funding. I helped start the Pollination Project. I had a small board, and we were making the grant decisions together. And I knew that we needed to push the boundary on how we trusted grantees and other groups. So I positioned it as a small scale experiment. And then it grew from there. So it was early on, we made a flow fund grant to a group that we work with called Service Space. It's a nonprofit that kind of has an international network based on kindness and generosity practices. So we said, here's a flow fund of $5,000. And they said, we'll only take it if there are no strings attached, no reports, no outcomes, no receipts, no proof that anything happened. It needed to be no strings attached. Kind of scary, but we just had to trust them and that the funds would be used well. And I knew that pushing in that small scale experiment would allow our board and our team to learn about trust. So it was a way to push how we operated. So much happened with that flow fund. A lending library got started. New projects to help animals in India got started. It was amazing with that $5,000. So once we saw it was possible, we were willing to do so much more. So position it as a pilot, experimental, start small. Creative conditions are really important. Make sure that funds are, if you create a small scale pilot, offer the flow fund in a way that matches or mirrors your funding guidelines or your mission, so that what comes back can look like the kinds of things you would fund. Deciding on who your flow funders would be, a great way to start is with grantees who you trust. I know Kindle Project has done that, where they've looked to very trusted grantees to give those organizations flow funds to then re-grant. That's a really great way to get started with it, because you already trust them, and it builds even more trust and relationship with your existing grantees. And at the end of the day, flow funding will not really move the needle on anything. If you're looking to measure your impact per dollar, flow funding is not really the way to do that. The best way to measure impact or to tell the story of impact of flow funding is through the stories, curating really good stories of how those small amounts of funds were spent and how they made a difference. The stories really inspire possibility, and they help people see that even small amounts of money can do so much when it's given to the right person at the right time in the right place. So the stories are absolutely crucial to developing a flow fund program. And I'm happy to answer any questions, or people can contact me afterward. I love flow funding. It's one of my favorite indie philanthropy practices. And just to sum up, this is a quote from Marion Weber. If I could wave a magic wand, I would ask that all people on this earth will one day see themselves as philanthropists. If we can have more trust and keep the money flowing and spreading out, then it will find its way to where it is needed.
Beautiful. I love the quote. Thank you. We do have one question that came up through your presentation. So maybe if we could just pause. The question is, does flow funding count as a tax-deductible donation or not necessarily?
That's a great question. It depends on how you structure it. So if you individually give a flow fund to an individual, probably not. If you give a flow fund to a C3 organization in the US and you're based in the US, and then you have them re-grant it, sure, of course. So it depends on how you set it up. But if you're giving ultimately to an individual at the end, it likely does not count as a tax-deductible donation, although I'm not an accountant, so always have to say that part.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Elisa. This is why I wanted you to share your story and share all of your stories, because I think that I really agree, both, from my personal opinion and also from the Indie Philanthropy opinion, that this sharing of stories is really what exemplifies the kind of impact we're looking to make in the world. And so now on to more stories from my friend and colleague, Sadaf Cameron, who's the director of Kindle Project. And I just wanted to remind everyone who's listening that you are welcome to type in your questions as we're talking, and we'll get to them either at the end or just after Sadaf speaks. We're going to have time to have a little chat together. So I welcome you, Sadaf.
Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, great. Awesome. Elisa, I loved hearing about the flow funding. Kindle Project has been championing flow funding from the beginning, and it's one of our favorite modalities of giving. So it's so exciting to hear about what you guys are up to. Thank you all for joining us today, and thank you to my colleagues Elisa and Ariane, and thank you to EPIP and Indie Philanthropy for including Kindle Project in this awesome webinar. My name is Sadaf, and I'm the co-founder and director of Kindle Project. Kindle Project is an outside-the-box creative grant-making organization supporting wild solutions by unusual suspects, cross-pollinating diverse sectors and fields, to meet the greatest challenges of our time. Woohoo! That's like a mouthful. Today I'm going to tell you a bit more about Kindle and myself, our philosophy around funding startups, and give you some examples of great startup work we support, and tell you a little bit about the challenges of funding startups and how to meet those challenges, how meeting those challenges has presented opportunities to deepen relationships with our grantees and advance our shared vision. So Kindle Project is based out of Santa Fe, New Mexico, but we have an international team. We fund unlikely problem solvers and creative doers, and often those that are less likely to be supported by mainstream foundations. We do this because we recognize that we're at this critical planetary tipping point, and that the mounting problems that we face are becoming more interconnected and more interdependent and increasingly complex, and now is the time to have all hands on deck. As funders, we've attempted to push the boundaries of where traditional philanthropy meets innovation to think up fresh, bold ways of giving and bring new voices into the fold. We intentionally scout ideas in their most raw form before they have become institutionalized. Today, I want to share with you our experience in funding startups as it has been some of our most dynamic, inspiring, and successful work. And it's also been the work that has continued over the arc of time of Kindle Project. So generally, I don't say that Kindle funds startups because my audience generally associates that with tech or business. Rather, I have said things that are kind of cute, like Kindle invests in creativity, imagination, and seeding dreams. Imagination, we believe, is a critical key to moving our planet in the direction of vibrancy. Encouraging brilliance and ingenuity is a cornerstone strategy of our work. Funding in this way has come with unexpected surprises that have lent to real possibilities for growth, has had a really unique impact, and has redefined what success looks like and who creates those standards. So on a personal note, this drive to work outside the box on systems change comes from my academic background in the arts and international peace and conflict studies. Following the attacks of September 11th, I chose to pursue a master's degree at the United Nations University for Peace, and I just naively believed that that was the greatest contribution I would be a nation system. Upon completion at the United Nations, I arrived at the very opposite end of that spectrum. Instead, I found that the most remarkable ideas, which offered a new kind of potential and gave me the kind of deep hope and inspiration I needed for real change, were the ones that came directly from impacted communities that we were working in and from passionate conversations from my activist colleagues. Since then, I've given real respect and attention to where those ideas are born, by whom, and their potential for a meaningful contribution in the world. Now I'm going to give you some examples of some of our favorite projects that we've supported in the last 8 years that have subtle and not so subtle impact across sectors. So first, we have 2 artists that we've honored with our Maker's Muse Artist Award. Through their Artist Award, gifted individuals have gone on to create international shows, films, books, collaborations, and outright organizations that are changing the landscape of who creates knowledge, where it comes from, who has access to it, and how it can be used for transformation and systems change. So this is Dynasty Handbag. She's based out of New York. She's a performance artist who asks us to witness her imperfect storm, which agitates biases and assumptions around queer identity, heteronormative structures, women's rights, and gender. Then we have Rich Pell. Rich Pell is an interesting story because he started as a Maker's Muse awardee, and then we later have funded him as an organization. So Rich Pell is the founder for the Center for Postnatural History. It's a museum dedicated to documenting genetically modified organisms and its impact on the planet. And then we have these clever organizations reach there with their political performance satire, intellectual and smart rebel tactics. These groups initially came to Kindle in the very early stages of their development, before they had become institutionalized. And with time and collaboration, they've blossomed into these poignant projects with serious goals. The Yes Lab is a project of the Yes Men. Now, the Yes Lab helps groups and communities to conceive and execute disruptive media events that keep people reminded of what's wrong, what could be right, and what's in store if we don't change our ways. So we were one of their first funders, and we gave them a multi-year general support commitment for 7 years. So we really try to commit at the front end by taking the risk and really taking the plunge to commit over time. The Juice Rap News, they break through the doldrums of mainstream headline news with irresistible beats and outrageous characters and lyrics to engage and awaken an otherwise sleepwalking public. If you don't know them, I really encourage you to check them out. They're incredible. Finally, we have two projects that have had broad international implications. When both of these projects came to Kindle, the reach of their impact and influence was not quite clear to us, but we were so excited about the vision of the project. So we took both of these projects, and we've been completely blown away and humbled by the results. So Skateistan is Afghanistan's first skateboarding school, bringing skateboarding, arts, and literacy to Afghanistan's most marginalized youth. Their work has single-handedly fostered educating marginalized youth as part of the broader goal to address widespread radicalization and terrorism in some of the most vulnerable regions in that part of the world. Dirty Wars, I encourage all of you to watch it if you haven't seen Dirty Wars, is a film by Jeremy Scahill, Civic Bakery, and Big Noise Films. And it has received international acclaim, an Academy Award nomination, and has vastly changed the conversation on US special operations abroad and drone wars. So when we invested in this project from the beginning, we didn't know the outcome of this film. And all of a sudden, it just had this broad range of kind of this domino effect of change that just blew us out of the water. So now I'm going to talk about a couple of challenges and opportunities in funding startups that we've learned along the way. So first, there's always this issue of risk. Risk is this like inherent word in philanthropy that's like just become this like dirty word. So if funders perceive that there's a significant risk, projects are less likely to get support, as we know. So I have found that other funders are reluctant to support projects that aren't well known or don't have this proven track record of success or don't already have the buy-in of other foundations. So we've met this challenge by redefining risk itself as opportunity. Taking the risk to jump into the unknown of collaboration has lent to real deep trust building with our grantee partners and thus built community and solidarity in this very beautiful and authentic way. Then there's this, always the issue of measuring impact and success. So how do you quantify success with a startup? First of all, we ask grantees to define what success looks like for them at jump, and that has looked a bunch of different ways. This has been a fascinating process, and as we heard, success isn't something that's fixed. There's no single equation that works across the board. Rather, we found that success and failure is dynamic and always shifting given the countless factors of everybody's unique context. And we really try to honor that context and that relationship. So this has essentially meant that we must be flexible with our partners and allow space for the work itself to change and grow over time. We engage more intimately with our grantees, offering general support grants, multi-year assistance. Try to show up as allies and friends to the work rather than approach. And flexibility has changed. We work with our partners, but how we influence the conversation in the field. That's it for now. To share with you this tiny little media tidbit of one of our favorite grantees, the Yes Men. If you guys haven't seen it, we found it really inspirational, and that would be my closing video.
Great. I'm gonna pull up the video 1 second.
Well, going to live narrative Judy Sarah, who's both chemical. Today, we have people now, for the first time, Dow is accepting full responsibility for the Bhopal catastrophe. This interview was inaccurate. The host was an elaborate one. The phrase not the extent of Dow's shares. So we will say that host is an honest representation of what
children taken for a ride by the yes men. The yes men? Yes men travel the world to embrace a corporate event. My name is Francisco.
So there's a rumor that you guys can't hear it. Is that what's going on?
Yeah, there seems to be a delay in the sound of the video. So we apologize for that, but maybe we can send that link around later or just put it in the chat.
Sorry about that, guys. Yeah, we will put it up online and I will make sure you guys all know when it's there so you can watch it. Apologies for the technical difficulty.
That sounds great, Biz.
Sadaf, thank you so much for sharing all of those incredible examples. I hope that everybody listening, I mean, I'm sure after hearing Elisa and Sadaf share these stories, I hope that you are filled with a lot of inspiration and maybe even some motivation. That's also what we're hoping for us, for all three of our organizations. I think storytelling and sharing the tales of how this funding has worked and how it's made an impact, and not only an impact, but a real impression on the grantee partners that they work with and who they work with is really one of the most exciting parts. So I thank you both so much for sharing those stories. And we had a couple questions coming in, and I thought that I would ask, that I would address one of them. Somebody asked specifically about what no strings attached means when you're using flow funding, but I'd sort of like to take that as a prompt and hear from both of you, Sadaf and Elisa, what no strings attached giving means for you, either within the context of flow funding, in funding startups, or in your work in general, because I have a feeling you both might have a lot to say about that. It's like this wonderful little catchphrase, no strings attached, but hearing about how that works in action would be great. If either of you wants to jump in and unmute, we're welcome.
Sadaf, do you want to start or you want me to? All right, I will start. Janet, thank you for that question. And I typed in an answer on the side, but so I'll be really honest, we rarely do no strings attached. Marion Weber did a beautiful job of no strings attached and does a beautiful job as a 501c3 public charity nonprofit. We do kind of have to collect reports generally. We did that initial flow fund that I mentioned with no strings attached just because the group that we were giving it to required it of us and we really wanted to work with them, and I knew that it would push my board and our staff on just trusting more. But for the most part, we do have some loose strings attached, like it needs to be a social change project. You can't give a flow fund for someone to, build a deck on their home. We actually have gotten grant applications for that. So, so we can't use a flow fund that way. It does need to have a social change benefit. We do require some minimal reporting from all grantees, including those who have been flow funded. Beyond that, there's not much. We try to keep it really light, but I don't want to say we are 100% no strings attached.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead, Sadaf, please.
Yeah, I can jump in really quickly and say that Kindle, I mean, we have a very interesting structure. We have a triple part structure. So we have a donor advised fund, we have a limited liability LLC, and we have a fiscal sponsor. And so out of the LLC, we're actually able to give truly no strings attached gifts to individuals. And so the way that we give that money is we really give it with blessings. And so we don't accept, it's not an application, there's no proposal, there's no reporting. It's a nomination process. So we have grantees that nominate individuals to be given these no strings attached gifts. On the reporting end of it, for the IRS, we can give up to the gift limit. Now we don't get the tax deduction for us, but for us, our philosophy is really that social change, in order to meet the kind of challenges that we're facing in this day and age, it's not about necessarily getting the tax deduction. And so we've set this structure intentionally so that we can actually give in this free kind of a way.
Great. Thank you both. That's really, really helpful. I think it's a conversation that we could keep having. We could probably have a whole webinar just on, really thinking into and exploring what these different methods mean and how we could maybe have, maybe not no strings attached, but less strings or more fun strings or more honoring strings of the work that our grantees are doing. I think that's something to flag for later. One of the questions that also came in was asking about Kindle Project and what inspired Kindle Project. So because I also work for Kindle Project, I can let you know that we have a really sweet video on our site that tells sort of the history and the genesis of Kindle Project. But Sadaf, do you want to say anything else?
Sure. I mean, there's so many ways that I can tell the story, but the story that really is like the genesis story is that myself and a single donor who was a young inheritor of wealth became dear friends, and she decided that she really wanted to create an outside-the-box renegade foundation. She wanted to do something that was completely different than the norm, and she had really unpacked her baggage responsibility of her wealth privilege. And when the two of us came together and had creative synergy, she was really in a place where she was like, I really want to get this done. And both of us were simultaneously looking at the world around us and saying, we're not meeting the mark. The world is in chaos. There is some mayhem. And meanwhile, like I said in my talk, this is like fertile ground for opportunity. And so we really felt like Kindle Project, if we could create this really interesting structure, we could be able to seed all of these very interesting ideas that are overlooked by philanthropy. Like, it was just too outrageous to be able to support some, crazy idea that had manifested from some artist, out in the desert. And so we really wanted to fill that gap. We recognized that there was that gap. And we had this opportunity to do something different. And we were young. I mean, we started Kindle Project when I was 26 years old. So in it was our late 20s, we really had a lot of fuel. We kind of had that like rebellious, like take down the system, and since then Kindle Project has grown and evolved its spirit in a very interesting way. And you can visit our website, and there's more stories there on the genesis of Kindle Project.
Just so folks know, if you want to add your questions in, or if you have any comments or things you want to share with the group, please just feel free to go ahead and find the questions sub-tab of your control panel and just type in your questions.
Great. Thank you, Biz. One of the questions that came in was asking how indie philanthropy is distinct or different from social justice philanthropy, or is it a subset of social justice philanthropy? So I guess I'll take that one. I think that, and I would love Biz, Sadaf, or Lisa, if you have anything to add on this, that would be great. But I think this is a really great question. And actually, just the other day, I was reading something from the organization called Resource Generation, who had kind of a one-pager, almost like a cheat sheet of how they are framing what social justice philanthropy looks like from the resource generation perspective. And as I was reading it, I agreed with absolutely everything that they said, and actually a lot of the very same principles and even some of the same language exists in our indie philanthropy kind of lexicon. So that was a really exciting moment for me. And of course, when we developed indie philanthropy, we knew that it is part, to me, it's really a part of social justice philanthropy. It's not separate from it. They exist in the same way. And so there's a lot of different sets of vocabulary out in the field right now that I think describe justice philanthropy in general, sometimes social justice philanthropy, and we're calling it indie philanthropy for a specific reason, hoping to be the umbrella that encompasses all of that. So I hope that that answers the question. I don't know if Sadaf or Elisa, you wanted to add anything else in there. I think that the way philanthropy works is really interesting, and what we did a lot of research when we developed the initiative and decided to name it this, wanting to make sure that we weren't replicating something that already existed in the field. And we hadn't found one place that really could be this umbrella and this nexus point and this meeting space to have all of these tools and resources together. So that's why we created it in that way. And for us, social justice philanthropy falls under it. And a lot of the stories on our site are coming from social justice philanthropy perspectives and organizations. And so I'm just looking. Biz, were there other questions that you saw or any questions that you had for the EPIP community in particular?
Well, kind of building off of that idea of an umbrella and both the trend and power of coalition funding and collaboration in this sector, I'm curious if you guys can speak a little bit about, how you found each other to be resources, or how you lean on networks, not just for collaboration, but for pushing forward initiatives that you're doing in your own specific programs.
That's a great question. Sadaf or Lisa, do you have an answer to it? Or do you want to respond?
Well, I would love to. This is Elisa. I think that there's kind of the outcome of philanthropy, or what we give to, and then there's the practice of philanthropy, right? And so much about Indie Philanthropy is about how we practice philanthropy. One saying that we use a lot at the Pollination Project is you kind of have to change yourself to change the world. Like, inner transformation is the path to outer transformation. So we really see the process and practice and how we show up for that practice as very much a piece of what we're creating and what we're funding in the world. So our involvement with Kindle and Indie Philanthropy Initiative in particular is really around holding ourselves accountable to a practice of philanthropy that upholds certain values that kind of is the foundation of what we all want to create in the world. And I really use both of them as thought partners and inspiration partners to be able to have our organization do the practice of philanthropy in a way that matches our values.
So for Kindle, this is Sadaf. We generally look to our grantees. I have an echo. Do you guys hear an echo?
No, I don't, Sadaf.
Okay. So generally, we look to our grantees for collaboration. So we give many of our grantees flow funds. We try to engage our grantees in a deeper feedback loop on not only how we could do our job better, but how the field could do its job better. And then we kind of feel like we play this role as a bridge between the communities that we're trying to support, the donors that participate in Kindle Project, and then how we can be in conversation with the greater field. And that was part of how we started the Indie Philanthropy Initiative. And now that Indie Philanthropy is its own entity, Kindle Project is carrying that forward by, again, going deeper with the engagement with our grantee community.
Thanks, Sadaf. I would just add one thing to that as well, like from the Indie Philanthropy perspective, and it is like really, once you find friends and colleagues within the field who you can have these challenging conversations with, or sometimes they're challenging and inspiring at the same time. There is, what's exciting to me about Indie Philanthropy is being in conversation with colleagues. There's like two tracks of conversation and collaboration that really are exciting me right now. One is with colleagues like Elisa and Sadaf, and a handful of others as well who are core partners and on our steering committee, who can really push the idea of what does this initiative need to do in the world a little bit more? How can we push a little bit further? Those conversations are really exciting to me right now. So having trusted allies within the field who can notice where the potential in your work is, where sometimes you haven't seen it. So I think that that's how we collaborate and push together, in a collective way. And then the other track of conversation that's really exciting to me is speaking with people who have had no contacts with Indie Philanthropy, who are maybe working in much more traditional foundation settings, who really are starting from a different place. Maybe they've never heard of social justice philanthropy. I think there's really exciting collaborations that can happen within those conversations. Because there's a lot to learn. There's a lot that I learned from those conversations, and there's a lot that our team learns because we're hearing about how we can be of service in all different areas of philanthropy. So that's one way that collaboration is exciting me now. And I know that we're almost at the end of our hour together. So I wanted to just say a couple things about how you can get involved with Indie Philanthropy and all of our organizations. But Biz, I just wanted to check in to see if there were any other questions or anything else we needed to address.
No, that's great. If you want to close out your last slide, I'll put on the final word.
Great. All right. Well, Elisa, Biz, Sadaf, thank you all so much for coming, for sharing your stories with us. I'm really excited that we have this webinar recorded and a part of the EPIP archives, because I think it's something that will be really great to share with so many different networks. And as for Indie Philanthropy, please visit the site. If you have resources from your own foundation you're excited about sharing, just send them along to me and we'll be happy to post them. You know, all of our groups have social media, so please follow along. We're always having great content. I know the Pollination Project and both Kindle Project have a lot of social media presence, so that's a great inspiration point as well. And there's my email address if anybody wants to reach out or collaborate or talk in any way about Indie Philanthropy. I'm here. And thank you all so much for taking the time to attend.
Wonderful. Thank you. And thank you for all these wonderful resources and for making yourselves available. Thank you to all our attendees and for your great questions. I'm excited for these conversations to continue, and hopefully we can have more events like this soon. Definitely check us out at www.epip.org, or feel free to send me an email at biz@epip.org. We'd love to have some of these conversations, perhaps even at our conference, and we will have calls for submissions coming out within probably the next month. So thank you all so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll see you soon. Thanks.